Mix together in one container distilled water, glycerin, and in another container an emulsifier and oil. Heat them both up and then pour the water phase into the oil phase. Let it cool down and add a preservative, and you get this gorgeous lightweight body milk. But it's all thanks to this emulsifier, glyceryl stearate, and PEG 100 stearate. When I think of a body milk, I imagine a very lightweight, non-greasy, almost water-like viscosity type of body lotion. But you may be surprised to know that this isn't necessarily true. There isn't any specific way you have to make a body milk. The truth is that it's just a marketing term. You could sell or make any body lotion and call it a body milk, and that'd be fine. That's actually how a lot of products are nowadays. The skincare industry keeps coming up with new marketing terms to help market their products and stand out from their competitors. So that's what makes it hard for me to narrow down these types of videos, because there's so many different ways you can make a body milk. So it's hard for me to just present one method. There's realistically probably endless possibilities on different formulas you can use to make body milks. So to keep things simple for this video, we are going to be focusing on very lightweight, thin viscosity type of body milks. So what is actually in a body milk? So once you understand what a product is, the next thing you need to figure out is what is in that product. First off, body milks don't actually contain milk. If you add coconut milk, cow's milk, oat milk, any type of milk that you drink, your body milk will go bad very, very quickly. So you can't add milk to your body milks. This includes moisturizers, body lotions, other than soap actually, because soap is self-preserving, but that's not what we're talking about. Unless you're buying like cosmetic grade milks, like they have a bunch over on Formulator sample shop. So if you do want milks in your products, then you can use cosmetic grade milk products. So just like lotions, body milks are oil and water emulsions. This means there is a higher percentage of water with a lower percentage of oil mixed into it, so they don't separate. Oil and water don't mix. So in order to get the two to mix, you need to use an emulsifier. And I actually don't have a video on emulsifiers, so if you want to see one, let me know. And also, if you're enjoying this video so far, make sure you subscribe to my channel. I post content all about formulating every single week, so hit the notification bell so you're notified every single time I upload, and follow me on Instagram at TaraLee Skincare. I am always posting over there and updating you guys. Here is a short explanation of what an emulsifier is. They're usually waxy, white, or off-white flakes, maybe little round balls, and these are added into the oil phase and heated up so they can be melted. And once they're all melted, you add in your heated water phase and you mix with an immersion blender, and you immediately get this white milky concoction. And as it cools, it starts to thicken and then turns into your lotion, body milk, cream, moisturizer, conditioner, etc. There are lots of different products that are made using emulsions, not just body milks, not just lotions. I also want to note that not all emulsifiers are like white or off-white, like flakes or anything. Some are actually in liquid form, but for the sake of this video, to keep it more simple, we're just going to be talking about the off-white, white, like flaky, waxy type of emulsifiers, because those are the ones that are like easiest to find and most commonly used by beginners. What emulsifier do we use for body milks? Like I said at the beginning, you can call any lotion a body milk. But like we all mutually agreed at the beginning, we all have decided a body milk has a low viscosity. So we need to pick an emulsifier that is going to blend the oil and water together, but isn't going to thicken it too much. Because most emulsifiers don't only blend the oil and water together, but a lot of them thicken as well. So we need to pick one that is going to be a strong enough emulsifier to keep the oil and water together, but also doesn't thicken too much. And not all emulsifiers work the same as the other. They're all very unique from one another and do different things, offer different viscosities, have different emulsifying like strengths. Some just don't emulsify as well as the other. So you really need to make sure you're testing out your emulsifier you're using and giving it long enough for like a stability test to make sure there's no separation. Personally, what I think is the best and easiest emulsifier to use for body milks is the following: Lotion Pro 165, Simulsolve 165, I don't know if I pronounced that right, glyceryl stearate self-emulsifying blend, and then in parentheses GMSSE, or cream maker blend. So these are all actually the exact same ingredient, just sold under different trade names. And what the inky name is actually glyceryl stearate and PEG 100 stearate, which means it's a blend of two different emulsifiers. And actually, a lot of the emulsifiers we purchase from suppliers are blends of different emulsifiers. Not all of them, but check the inky names of all the ingredients you buy to get a better understanding of what's inside them, because a lot of the ingredients we purchase are just blends of ingredients, but again, a lot of them aren't. So just check the inky names and you can figure out what's actually in your emulsifier. You can also figure out what the suggested or recommended usage rate is. Every supplier uses like a different name for this. Some of them will say like suggested usage rate 1 to 10%, or it'll say recommended usage rate 1 to 10%. Every time you're shopping for ingredients, always read the entire description to learn all about the ingredient. The supplier provides so much information about every ingredient. You can basically learn everything you need to know about formulating with it from the description most of the time. Not all the time. But even though they provide these like recommended usage rates, you still always need to do small batch experiments to see what percentage works best for you, because you never know what percentage you're gonna need. The emulsifier that I have is Lotion Pro 165. So if you check out the description for the glyceryl stearate and PEG 100 stearate, you'll see the recommended usage rate is 1 to 5%. Your supplier might have a different recommended usage rate. That's totally fine. Stay within their usage rate. And I'm going to be using it at the highest recommended usage rate. So let's talk about how we write our formula for a body milk. So our body milk is going to be divided up into 3 different phases. We have phase A, phase B, and phase C. Our formula also needs to add up to 100%. And we use the formula to create our recipe. And I'll actually explain how you can use the formula to create your recipe later on in this video. But for now, let's just focus on the fact that it's written in percents and your formula has to add up to 100. That's all you gotta worry about for now. Phase A is going to be our heated water phase. This is going to include any ingredients that are water soluble and aren't heat sensitive. And you can figure out if your ingredient is water soluble or heat sensitive by checking the description where you bought the ingredients. And if none of that is mentioned, then feel free to message the supplier and ask them about it. And phase B is going to include all of our oil soluble ingredients that aren't heat sensitive. And this includes our emulsifier, the glyceryl stearate and PEG 100 stearate. This will also include any plant oils, butters, or any emollient esters. And if you don't know what emollient esters are, I think it is important to understand what they are. Emollient esters, a short explanation, they are basically non-greasy, oily, and non-heavy oils. So think of like olive oil, apricot kernel oil, sunflower oil. They're basically like that, but most of the time they're clear and they're so like lightweight and they don't feel greasy and heavy on your skin like oils typically do. So they make really good ingredients for things like body milks, which have very light and low viscosity, because they are easier to keep emulsified. And since this is a lighter weight body milk, a lighter weight oil would make more sense. So that's why I want to mention emollient esters, because we're going to be using that in our formula. But if you don't have an emollient ester, you can use plant oils. But like I said, plant oils can be a little bit harder to keep emulsified. And with body milks being thinner emulsions, that's something you need to really think about. And emollient esters are commonly used in moisturizers, creams, lotions that are marketed as oil-free because they don't have like the same feeling as oil, but they offer the same like skin benefits. They're moisturizing. So if you ever want to make an oil-free product or you suffer from like oily, acne-prone skin, you can use emollient esters in your moisturizers to make it oil-free. And another thing I want to mention is even some like plant oils like olive oil, sunflower oil, apricot kernel oil, some of these oils are easier to keep emulsified compared to others. Like hemp seed oil is much harder to keep emulsified into a lotion compared to something like sunflower seed oil. So that is something to keep in mind also when you are picking your oils. And then phase C will include our preservative and any other ingredient that is heat sensitive. This includes water soluble or oil soluble. And there is no way around using a preservative. You have to use a preservative because the product contains water. Any product that contains water has to have a preservative, or else it'll immediately start growing like mold and bacteria, because where there is water, there is life. So if you have water in a product, it immediately can start growing stuff. Even if you can't see mold, there can still be bacteria there. And if you want to learn more about preservatives, I have a video all about preservatives that I'll have linked in the description box for you guys. It's part of the Formulating for Beginners series, so it's easy for beginners to understand. So since this video is for beginners, I'm going to recommend that you use Liquid Dermal Plus as your preservative. This preservative only needs to be used at 0.5%, so you barely need any of it. It's very inexpensive and most suppliers sell it. And it's also not very pH sensitive, like it is like most preservatives, but it has a pretty big window. Unlike a lot of the Ecocert approved preservatives, those are harder to formulate with. They can destabilize emulsions and they are very, very pH sensitive. They have to be in like a specific pH most of the time to be active. So this is why I just don't recommend Ecocert preservatives for beginners. If that's something you want to use, I recommend practicing formulating with an easier preservative to use for a while until you get used to formulating. And then once you get a little bit more advanced in formulating, you can start using your Ecocert approved preservatives. But if you're a beginner, don't use Ecocert approved preservatives, or else it's really going to frustrate you and you won't feel like motivated and inspired to formulate. So you might be wondering like, what the heck is pH if you've never heard that before? pH is actually something really important to understand with formulating, but there's too much to discuss in this video. So if you want to learn about pH, go watch my video. It's part of the Formulating for Beginners series. It's all about pH. And pH can really make or break your product and your skin sometimes too, so it's important to understand pH. So let's say you don't want to use Liquid Dermal Plus. The other preservative I would recommend is Euxil PE 9010. This one is even lip safe as well, and you only need to use it at 1%. I have heard of people having issues with it messing up emulsions, but I luckily have never had issues with it. So I do think that's a good option to try if you don't want to use Liquid Dermal Plus. Now, if you want to use an Ecocert approved preservative, there are a few that I use regularly that I would recommend, and that's GeoGuard ECT, Euxil K903, or Tri-State Eco. Tri-State Eco and GeoGuard ECT both have a very strong almond scent that will come through in your product, so keep that in mind. So if you don't want that, go with Euxil K903. I also forgot to mention GeoGuard 221. This is another great option. And I'll have all these ingredients linked in the description box as well. Anything I mention in this video or use, it'll be in the description box. So here is a formula for a body milk with very, very, very minimal ingredients. I'm gonna be making a 400 gram batch, and I'm starting with phase A. I'm using 298 grams of the distilled water, 40 grams of the glycerin. You can use a different humectant if you want. And once you're done weighing out phase A, what you need to do is tare your scale and place phase A back on there and write down how much it weighs, because we're going to heat this up and some of the water is going to evaporate, so we'll have to replace that later. But moving on to phase B, I'm going to weigh out the 20 grams of the Lotion Pro 165, which is the glyceryl stearate and PEG 100 stearate, and then 40 grams of caprylic capric triglyceride, which this is the emollient ester I'm going to be using. And then I'm going to take both my phases, bring it over to my stovetop and I'm gonna put it on medium heat. I filled my pan with about an inch of water. And what I like to do is cover both of my beakers with some foil just to prevent anything from falling in while I walk away as it heats up. And as it heats, you shouldn't have to mix the oil or water phase, but sometimes you do, it just depends. For this specific formula, you do not need to mix it as it heats. And once everything in phase B has been melted, you can remove the phase A, which is the water phase, from the heats and add back in any water that evaporated. You're gonna have to place it on the scale and add back in any water that evaporated. Normally it's like 1 gram. And then you're going to pour phase B into phase A, and you're gonna mix it with an immersion blender. This is a high shear mixer, and this is going to help emulsify and mix everything together. And you get this milky concoction. And normally as it cools, it would thicken, but since this is a body milk made with glycerol stearate and PEG 100 stearate, it's not going to thicken. And once it cools to around 100 degrees Fahrenheit, you can move on to phase C, and we're gonna add in 2 grams of liquid Dermal Plus and mix that in. And then it's time to adjust the pH. So there is like a whole thing to adjusting pH, and I'll link to my video down below that explains it in more detail. But basically, this is a short explanation. Take a beaker, fill it with distilled water, and place your pH meter in it. And then you're gonna grab a small beaker. Normally I use like a 25 milliliter beaker here. And you're going to pour a little bit of the body milk into that small beaker. That way we're not contaminating the main batch with our pH meter since it's not sanitized. And you're gonna place the pH meter into that small 25 milliliter beaker and let it sit for about a minute until the numbers quit like moving around. And the pH of this one was around 6. And our skin's natural pH is between 4.5 and a 5.5. And honestly, this kind of would be fine to keep it here if you wanted to. It's not going to harm your skin. Some products need to be in a pH of 6, but again, we're not going to get into all that. Go watch my video on pH if you want to know more. But if you want to lower the pH for it to be between your skin's natural pH, what you can do is take another container and you're going to mix together equal parts water with citric acid. So do 50% distilled water, like 50 grams distilled water, with 50% citric acid, like 50 grams of citric acid. Mix it together until the citric acid dissolves, and you'll get a clear thing like this, like I'm showing in this bottle. This is my citric acid solution. And you're going to use this to add to your body milk to lower the pH. So for this specific body milk, only add in 1 drop at a time. I accidentally added too many drops. I literally only added like 4 drops and I made the pH way too low. So seriously, just add 1 drop and take the pH and see where it's at. You might not even need to lower the pH with this. Like I said, if you don't want to, it's fine. If it's around 6, go ahead and try it if you want. But after you add the drop of the pH buffer in, mix it in and let it sit for about a minute before you take the pH again. And you're just going to pour it in a little beaker again and take the pH again and keep doing this until you get the pH you want. And this is the final body milk. It's a very thin viscosity. I also made these labels for all of my bottles, and if you would like to learn how to make labels, I have a video here on my channel showing you guys how to make clear labels and how to make labels with a white background. So check the description box for a link to that video. So if this body milk is way too thin for you, you can easily thicken it. So what I would recommend using is a fatty acid or a fatty alcohol. And I know the names might sound scary because it has acids and alcohol in it, but I promise they are not drying. They will not hurt your skin. A lot of these fatty acids and fatty alcohols are naturally derived. They are used in organic approved products. They are used in naturally compliant products. So they are totally completely safe, and they actually moisturize your skin as well. They are emollients, which means they moisturize your skin. So a few common fatty acids and fatty alcohols that I've personally used is cetyl alcohol, cetyl alcohol, behenyl alcohol, I hope I said that right, and stearic acid. So out of all those, I personally would recommend using cetyl alcohol. I think you'll get the best sensory feel. So if you want to take the formula we just did and subtract 1% from the distilled water percentage and add 1% cetyl alcohol to the heated oil phase, you will get a slightly thickened body milk. And obviously, if this still isn't thick enough for you, you can take 1% out of the distilled water phase again and make it 2% cetyl alcohol, or 3% cetyl alcohol, 4% cetyl alcohol, as long as you're using within the recommended usage rate, and make sure your formula still adds up to 100%. And when you're doing these test batches, I always recommend only doing like 100-gram batch recipes. That way you're not wasting a lot of products. So let's talk about how to make body milks more stable. So like I said before, body milks, since they're thin emulsions, they're really not the most stable. And it's kind of tricky to make them more stable without making them too thick. So obviously, this cetyl alcohol that we just talked about will actually help stabilize the emulsion. It's known as a co-emulsifier and also an emollient because it moisturizes the skin, and a thickener, kind of does like a number of things. But if we use too much of it, it will make the body milk too thick. And 1%, maybe 2% might not even be enough to stabilize our emulsion. So what else could we use to stabilize our emulsion but not like make it too thick? Polymers. And what polymers are, they are gelling agents slash like thickeners, and they thicken water. So there's two different types of polymers. There's synthetic polymers and there are natural polymers. So let's talk about the natural ones first. Some of the common natural polymers are xanthan gum soft. That is the one I use all the freaking time on my channel. And then there is this one here. I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's also called TaraLee gum. We love that. And then Gara gum seems to be really popular. I get a lot of questions about that, even though I've never used it. And I actually forgot to mention one of my favorites. This is Silagel, and this is a combination of a few different ingredients, including xanthan gum. And I'm not really 100% sure if this is Ecocert. I couldn't find confirmation on that, but it is naturally compliant, and I do end up using it later on in this video alongside with an Ecocert emulsifier. So keep that in mind if you are trying to do Ecocert products. You need to research to see if this is Ecocert or not, because I'm not 100% sure. The thing is with synthetic polymers, this isn't always the case. It can really depend on just you personally, like how picky your skin is, or the formula, like how much you use. It really varies. These natural polymers can feel like tacky on the skin. It kind of creates like a film. Obviously, if you use them at the right percentage and you use them in the right product, then it won't cause that issue at all. It's just something to keep in mind. And you don't want to use too much of these, or else, yeah, it will definitely feel tacky and sticky on the skin. So these natural polymers will thicken the water phase and turn it into like a slightly thickened gel, which makes it harder for the oil phase to separate out of. So that's how these natural polymers will help stabilize the emulsion. So adding in like xanthan gum soft, maybe at like 0.2% to 5%, along with the 1% cetyl alcohol, will probably create a pretty good stable body milk. Obviously, we don't know for sure until we do stability testing. And you can do stability testing by, sending it to a lab, which could be pretty expensive, or you'll have to make the product and just let it sit for a few months and see what she does. So with these natural polymers, you're going to want to mix them with glycerin first. At least that's how xanthan gum soft works. I don't have experience with all the other ones, but xanthan gum soft, you want to mix it with glycerin and then add in your distilled water. So here is an example formula of using xanthan gum as a stabilizing agent for our body milk. I'm going to be making a 400-gram batch, and again, starting with phase A. This time I'm going to weigh out 40 grams of glycerin first, and then mix it with the 2 grams of xanthan gum soft. And this is called a slurry, and this is going to prevent the xanthan gum from clumping up in the distilled water. Because when xanthan gum comes into contact with water, it can clump up. So mixing it with glycerin prevents that from happening. And then I'm going to pour the 296 grams of distilled water on top of that and mix it all together until it thickens. And now that we're done with phase A, we can tare our scale, place our beaker back on our scale, and write down how much it weighs. because we're going to be heating this up and some of the water is going to evaporate and we'll have to replace that. Moving on to phase B, I'm going to add in 20 grams of the Lotion Pro 165. Again, this is glyceryl stearate and PEG 100 stearate. And then 40 grams of the caprylic capric triglyceride. And once again, I'm going to be placing them in my water bath on medium heat and letting everything in phase B melt. And once everything in phase B has been melted, I'm going to take out phase A and replace any water that evaporated. Again, you only get around like maybe 1 gram of evaporation. And then we can remove phase B and pour phase A into phase B and then immediately mix with our immersion blender. And once it cools, we can move on to phase C, which is 2 grams of liquid Dermal Plus, and we're going to mix that in and then go ahead and adjust the pH and just let it sit until the next day because it does take 24 hours for things to normally reach its full viscosity. And this is how this body milk looks when it has xanthan gum added into the formula. It has thickened up just slightly. The other section of polymers to help stabilize the emulsion are the synthetic polymers. So to name a few, there is Sepimax Zen, Sepanove EMT10, Carbomer, and Aristoflex ABC. I'm sorry if I butchered the name of any of these. But what I really love about these synthetic polymers is they thicken and they gel water, of course, but they have such a light sensory feel on the skin. It almost feels just like water on your skin. It doesn't feel tacky, doesn't feel sticky. Unlike a lot of the natural polymers, they tend to do that when you use them at higher percentages. But you can use these synthetic polymers at higher percentages and they don't feel sticky and tacky on the skin. So out of all of these synthetic polymers, the two that I think would be ideal would be the Sepimax Zen and Sepanove EMT10. Because Sepimax Zen can actually emulsify up to 25% oil. And I do want to point out that you can emulsify up to 25% oil when it's accompanied by a natural polymer like xanthan gum soft. So you can combine these natural polymers with synthetic polymers to create an even more stable emulsion. And the Sepanove EMT10 can emulsify up to 50% oil. These are essentially like adding in a other emulsifier because we already have the glyceryl stearate and PEG 100 stearate, which is technically 2 emulsifiers, but it's in one ingredient like we mentioned at the beginning. So we have that emulsifier. And then we'd be adding in the Sepimax Zen or Sepanove EMT10 as another emulsifier. We would get an amazing, stable, emulsified body milk using those polymers. That isn't to say that the Carbomer and Aristoflex or the natural polymers wouldn't also work as a co-emulsifier. But if you don't have those, you could still use the Carbomer or Aristoflex ABC. Those will also help stabilize the emulsion. So what gets a little confusing with these synthetic polymers is that even though these are all water soluble, like you could add them into water and they would gel water, when you're making an emulsion, you actually want to add them into the oil phase. You can add them to the water phase, but in my experience, the emulsion just works out better when you add them to the oil phase. So if we're going to be adding in synthetic polymers, you want to add them to the oil phase. So another thing to keep in mind with these synthetic polymers is they can be a little finicky with certain ingredients like aloe vera, hydrolyzed proteins, sodium PCA, sodium lactate, and cationic surfactants. So I've used aloe vera with Sepimax Zen and I had no problem, but I have had issues with it in Carbomer, and it could cause issues with the other polymers as well. I'm not really 100% sure, haven't used it with the other polymers. And I do know for sure Carbomer cannot be used with sodium PCA, hydrolyzed proteins, sodium lactate, and cationic surfactants. I have had failed experiments from doing that. I mainly have the most experience with the Carbomer and Sepimax Zen. I only recently purchased the Aristoflex ABC and have only formulated with it for this video. So I wanted to use Sepimax Zen for this example formula, but I only had a little bit, and I did do an experiment batch, and I really like the results of this, but I didn't have enough Sepimax Zen to make a large batch like on camera. So instead, I decided to use Aristoflex ABC. I actually only needed to use 0.2%, because it thickened up so much more than the Sepimax Zen. The Sepimax Zen, I used 0.5%. So keep that in mind. All of these polymers thicken differently from others. So do small 100-gram test batches. Here is the formula that I used for a synthetic polymer body milk. So once again, I'm making a 400-gram batch, and of course, starting with phase A. And I'm going to add in 40 grams of glycerin and then 297.2 grams of distilled water. And of course, tare your scale and weigh that and take note of how much it weighs. And then moving on to phase B, I'm going to add in 0.8 grams of the Aristoflex ABC, and then 40 grams of the caprylic capric triglyceride, and then lastly, the 20 grams of Lotion Pro 165. And again, covering both beakers, placing them in a pan with water in it on about medium heats, and then letting it sit until everything in phase B has melted. And once everything in phase B has melted, we can remove phase A, add back in any water that evaporated, and then pour phase A into phase B. And once again, mixing with our immersion blender, letting it cool down to 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and then adding in phase C ingredients, which is 2 grams of Liquid Dermal Plus. Mix that in, and then check and adjust the pH. Let it sit until the next day, and here is the viscosity. It actually has a slightly thinner viscosity than the xanthan gum one. Now let's discuss an Ecocert version. PEG 100 stearate is not Ecocert approved, but what you can try to use is Redomulse SCG/Ecomulse. Same ingredient, just different name. This emulsifier does thicken up more than the glyceryl stearate and PEG 100 stearate, but I noticed it does thicken a lot less compared to a lot of other emulsifiers, so I figured it would be a great option to try. So I created this formula that I tried, and I'm using 4% Redomulse SCG, and I also decided to use 0.5% Silagel as the natural polymer, since it does have some emulsifying properties as well. And then I'm using 1.5 grams of Euxyl K 903. This preservative actually has a pretty low pH, so keep that in mind while formulating. So I'm making a 200-gram batch, and I'm starting with 20 grams of glycerin and mixing it with 1 gram of Silagel. And again, I'm creating a slurry to help prevent the Silagel from clumping. And Silagel is actually a combination of a bunch of different ingredients, and xanthan gum is one of them. And then I'm going to top it off with 148 grams of distilled water and mix it all together until it has thickened. And again, tare your scale and weigh that and take note of how much it weighs. Moving on to phase B, I'm using 8 grams of the Redomulse SCG and 20 grams of the caprylic capric triglyceride. And once again, we're going to place both of our phases in a water bath, which is a pan filled with like an inch of water on around medium heats. Let them sit until everything in phase B has melted. Remove phase A, add in any water that evaporated, and then remove phase B and pour phase A into phase B, and then mix with your immersion blender. And once it has cooled to around 100 degrees Fahrenheit, you can add in your phase C ingredients, which includes 1.5% Euxyl K 903, which is 3 grams of Euxyl K 903. And this does lower the pH of your body milk, which does kind of make pH adjusting harder, sometimes easier. In this case, it made it easier because when I checked the pH, it was at 4.5, which is perfect. Our skin's natural pH is between 4.5 and 5.5. I do have a video all about how to raise pH as well. It's in my video all about pH that I keep referring to. So if you want to learn all about pH, go watch that video. So I do hope you found all of that information extremely helpful. All of these formulas I shared are basically just like the base of a body milk. Have fun like adding in all your additives and like colors, fragrances. You can add all of those in. Obviously, your fragrance would be added in at the end because it's heat sensitive. If you want to add in extracts, you would add those in at the end because they're heat sensitive. Just whatever ingredient you want to add in, read all about it from the supplier, and it should give you a very, very good explanation on how to add it in. Keep in mind, if you're using those synthetic polymers, they do have sensitivities to specific ingredients like hydrolyzed proteins, aloe. Crazy things can always happen when adding in different ingredients into a formula, so just keep that in mind. You can always sign up for my Patreon and you can message me over there with formulating questions. I'm always happy to help you guys out. And I will actually be formulating a strawberry body milk over on my Patreon. And this body milk, I actually formulated it to be skin healing, moisturizing, hydrating, and it has vitamin C. So it has healing ingredients like allantoin and bisabol. I don't know if that's how it's pronounced. So whenever I make body lotions, I like to have like healing ingredients. That's what that body milk is. If you guys want the formula, you got to go sign up for my Patreon. The $5 tier has access to the bonus videos. Now it's time for the portion of the video where I explain to you guys how to transfer all those formulas I shared, because I know if you're a beginner, you're probably very confused, like how the heck do I use that formula and like create a recipe? Like how do I weigh out percentages? I know that's super confusing. What you do, okay, first, here's the formula, right? It adds up to 100%. No matter how much product you want to make, your formula is always going to add up to 100%. So that stays the same. Let's come over here. How much body milk do you want to make? Let's say you want to make 1,000 grams of body milk. That's called our batch size. So phase A is calling for 74.5% distilled water. So what we need to do is figure out what is 74.5% of 1,000. You can do this very, very simple by just Googling what is 74.5% of 1,000. It's 745. Or you could do the math, which this video is already long enough, so I'm not going to explain to you how to do the math because every time I do, people yell at me in the comments. So if you want to learn how to do the math, go watch my video all about formulating body scrubs for beginners. That video is my most popular video, and I explain how to do the math over there. We can just keep going. What is 10% of 1,000? 100. Let's move on to phase B. What is 5% of 1,000? 50. Once you get used to it, it becomes super, super easy. And you can do the same thing with any batch. Like if you want to make 500 grams, just find what is 74.5% of 500. The formula is always staying the same. What's changing is your recipe, and you create your recipe. You create your batch size. You choose however much you want to make. This is just how everybody formulates. They formulate in percents. And it just makes it really easy to scale up your recipes. So they're always the same no matter what. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know if you really like the long form type of like information heavy content, because now that my business is closed, I have a lot more time to do this. Obviously, I can't do a video like this every week. It takes a lot of days of filming and a lot of hours of editing, so I definitely can't manage this every week. But I do want to do long form video content like this more often if that's what you guys enjoy. And obviously, I'll still do like my shorter recipe videos as well. Leave me a comment down below letting me know what video you want to see next in this Formulating for Beginners series. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Later. Myself with music and find someone to listen.